In today's fast-changing business environment, leadership agility is no longer a nice to have, it's essential. Leadership agility refers to a leader's ability to recognize shifts, make rapid decisions, and adapt their approach while maintaining effectiveness. Today, I'm joined by Summit Leadership Partners Kevin Impelman, who is going to present on this topic at the upcoming annual SIOP conference. Hi, Kevin.
How's it going?
It's going great. I was hoping maybe you could give us a little more context or background on kind of what prompted you to choose this topic of research.
Yeah, with SIOP, it's great. It's a conference where we bring together a lot of great people that do what we do, apply organizational psychology in the workforce. And so I connected with some folks and a topic came up around leadership agility. And, that's something that we've talked about quite a bit at Summit, something that we do when we assess and coach leaders at Summit about the ability of leaders to really sort of read the situation, adapt to it. And so fortunately we had data on related to leader agility, and so then we're able to put something together. So yeah, excited to talk about this topic.
I had a chance to read through your research, which examines which leader behaviors contribute most to agility and how different stakeholder groups actually perceive agile leaders. You used the Leadership Versatility Index, the LVI. You essentially identified four key leadership dimensions: forceful, enabling, and then strategic and operational. When I was reading through the research, to me, it seemed like these four different leadership behaviors were actually on a spectrum, with maybe the forceful and enabling being on an x-axis, and I'm visualizing the strategic and operational being on the y-axis. Is this an appropriate way to think about it in terms of maybe high on one versus low on the other?
Yeah, I mean, typically, so the way we think about it is what you lead and how you lead. So, whether the situation demands you to be more operational versus strategic is involved into the type of actions, decisions you'll make. And then the how you lead is, that balance of forceful, enabling. And typically we see if someone's, overly forceful, they're not showing enough enabling. And so typically we see those go hand in hand. And, the way that it's asked of participants is basically asking leaders like, hey, is this person exhibiting the right amount of strategic thinking or the right amount of operational thinking, so that it calibrates it to their specific role and what the context needs. And so then those raters then provide saying, they're kind of underdoing it, or they're overdoing it, or they're exhibiting the right amount. And so that's how that's collected for sure.
And then in your research, you look at these different stakeholder groups, essentially different levels or different perceptions: supervisors, peers, and direct reports. Were you surprised to find that the four different leadership behaviors were valued equally across those shareholder groups?
Yeah, and to be specific, the aspect of having the appropriate balance of those leader behaviors was valued equally. So there may be some differences by stakeholder group as far as, maybe their supervisors want to, value strategic thinking more. But it was more around when we looked at how everybody rated them on that sort of right amount versus too much versus little much, not enough. We correlated that with just overall ratings of leader effectiveness. And we found that correlation was pretty much identical across all those leader groups, across all those stakeholder groups. So each of those stakeholder groups equally valued the ability for those leaders to exhibit kind of the right amount of those behaviors.
And so when you're saying the right amount of behaviors, that leads me to think through maybe a situational leadership style, or maybe even situational awareness for that leader to understand very quickly kind of what behavior to apply based on the situation. So I'm curious, Kevin, if that's the approach is almost a situational awareness, how can organizations go about teaching leaders this? Or how could you and Summit Leadership Partners go about providing this type of coaching and training to allow those leaders to have better awareness so that they can then implement, the appropriate leadership behavior?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's come up for us a lot is just context is key. And so, I know at both Entromy and Summit, we work with private equity-backed portfolio companies. And, for the most part, a lot of these companies are growth companies. And, if you just think back, the past 5 years, just the amount of change that business leaders have seen. I mean, just take, for instance, technology as a sector, 2021 and, just being able to ramp up and, the market's hot, everyone's like leveraging this technology, and then that completely shifts. And even within private equity, right? The interest rates changing. And so, when we're assessing leaders, so much that comes up is how important it is to understand the context of what they're going into. Not just, hey, this leader had this experience in this industry or in this role. Does this leader know which levers to pull in this context? And so when it comes to organizations helping leaders be better at that, I kind of think of a sports analogy, and saw this recently. And so it's spring training right now for baseball. And so, if you're training a baseball player to be a good hitter and you throw 50 strikes in a row for them to practice hitting strikes, and then you throw 50 curveballs in a row to have them practice hitting curveballs, and then you take someone else and you throw a curveball, a strike, high and outside, you mix it up each pitch, the second person's probably going to be a better hitter because they're able to quickly read the situation versus just kind of that rote. And when I think about leadership development, a lot of times there's overemphasis on just specific leadership skills that fit a stagnant environment. And I think what organizations can do better on is, from that situational leadership, being able to read the context and knowing how to adapt their leadership behaviors to fit the situation better. And so kind of that reading and reacting mode is something that would be really helpful for leaders.
I love a good sports analogy. And while baseball is not necessarily my favorite sport, I do appreciate the analogy, but I want to talk about it just for another minute or two, because I wonder if we could think about management style as better training. But basically, if a young manager maybe doesn't quite know how to execute on the fastball, and so giving them those 50 opportunities in a row might be really good to exercise that muscle as maybe a level one. Then maybe progressing to being able to read the situation would be more applicable. And I'm almost guessing if that's the way to think about it, because a lot of research does point to giving kind of an incremental leadership purview. And so you can't really jump right into leading an organization if you've never really led, maybe in a more departmentalized function. And so I guess I'm thinking through hitting those fastballs versus hitting those curveballs. You really want to get good at that and then maybe think about how to read the situation. Am I thinking about that correctly in terms of the leadership and training?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the reps count, getting as many reps and feedback so you know how to adjust. I think the thing to watch out for is, and this is through years and years of doing executive assessment, is sometimes leaders, they kind of figure out how to hit that fastball and they want to apply the same thing to every other type of pitch, right? So they see success, that's their leadership playbook, and then they take that somewhere else. And so, the more that leaders of leaders are able to have them say, hey, take a step back, think about the situation you're leading. Is that style still going to make sense? And I would add, the type of people you're leading, right? If you're leading a group of engineers or a group of creative people versus a group of kind of salespeople, right? There's going to be some different dynamics that you have to consider there. But I think it starts too with the organizations better identifying what the situation needs, going back to the levers to pull. Because, going back to our private equity clients, I think they just have to be crystal clear about, hey, listen, this is a true turnaround situation. We need someone to come in here and break some stuff and change things up and just really, really mix it up. And there's other situations where it's like, hey, we've got a good thing here. We've got some good market tailwinds. Like, don't disrupt the apple cart. Just like come in here, be a steady hand, be consistent. And I think unfortunately what a lot of organizations do is we need someone with experience in this specific industry that has done it at this scale or slightly bigger scale, versus like we need someone who can lead us through a transformation, or we need someone who can lead us through opportunities. And so I think that's more important than just the industry they worked in.
And so thinking through those specific situations, that's probably where you'd want to see different measurements, I suppose you could say, on the four different leadership dimensions that you found, because and it might necessitate one kind of style versus the buy and hold that you kind of mentioned, don't rock the boat too much. That might be a different leadership style. And so are those sort of the applications of your findings then?
Yeah, and one of the things we did is we took some of the research. There is a Harvard Business Review article that Robert Kaiser published, who authored the LVI, and basically found over time, as measured through the LVI, leadership versatility or leadership agility, in this case, kind of the broader bucket, had a stronger relationship with leader effectiveness over the past 5-10 years. And what we wanted to do is do a double click there and say, like, okay, what does that mean? Like, specifically what around that? And so using the LVI, we're able to look at those 4 dimensions and basically found that, of those dimensions, the 2 that showed the strongest relationship was showing the right level of strategic thinking, that strategy piece, and then showing the right amount of enabling, and specifically the behaviors around those. Out of all the behaviors of hundreds of executives we've assessed, the behaviors around coaching, providing appropriate coaching, and then also providing appropriate direction were important. So I'd say that's across the board. But then, definitely to your point, as far as, let's say, something where it needs a lot of operational rigor and focus. If you're doing a 360, if that situation requires that, you want to really look into the operational side. Are they exhibiting the right amount? Are they micromanaging? Are they getting too far down into the weeds? Are they not doing enough? Are they just thinking about strategy and not necessarily like actually getting their hands dirty and doing it, right? So I think, yeah, given the situation, you can kind of look at these dimensions to understand more.
So I want to pivot a little bit, Kevin, to a point that I think maybe you were looking forward to here in terms of the dark side of leadership agility. And so when I presented this to you kind of before our call, you had a similar chuckle, but essentially, hey, is too much flexibility a bad thing? Is there this overemphasis on, hey, I can be all things in all situations and I'm going to, read the situation and react differently? Is that maybe too much at some point? And maybe if you could speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for followership, they want to see consistency, right? So if you're a, hard-nosed leader that like holds people accountable one day and then the next day you're like, giving them hugs and coaching them through everything, it's going to be confusing, right? So definitely I think that there's a couple things that will help with this so that you're not seeming like you're like flip-flopping as a leader back and forth. So one is, these situations I'm talking about are typically longer periods of time. So it's not like a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month even type of shift. It's, really reading the situation. And I think for leaders, what's important is, one, having self-awareness around what are some other derailers, right? So when they come under stress, what are those things that are going to get in the way of them being effective? And then two, just being very upfront and vocal about, bringing everyone along on the same page so they understand why they are leading that way. So there's a common and mutual understanding of, hey, this is something where everyone's just got to focus on operations. And so detail is really important. So we really got to focus to make sure we get things right, measure 3 times, cut once type of thing. Versus, growth situations like, hey, fail fast. No repercussions. I grow, like the market's helping us. Let's try new things. Let's be creative, right? And so then that's opposite. So I think for leaders to communicate that, so people know that, and then obviously acting accordingly to that to support them.
So Kevin, one of the things that I wanted to bring up was the assessment side of leadership agility. And you brought up the LVI. Obviously, that's a well-known tool for measuring leadership agility. But I'm curious, Entromy, we have a whole suite of reporting tools and capabilities for measuring organizational effectiveness, as well as some different leadership capabilities. Are there any tools or maybe nuances of the reports that maybe would help indicate leadership agility that you've seen outside of the LVI?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I'll back up as far as like not necessarily tools, but, in the assessment process. So let's say you're bringing in, a new CEO to come into an organization, really in the interview process, really probing in to see how they've been able to lead effectively through some different situations and seeing what they've learned from. So really probing into what they've learned and applied and how they've altered their sort of leadership approach. And that's not to say that you have someone that changes their leadership approach and principles every month is the right candidate for you. It's more about like, hey, I tried to use this playbook in this situation and it didn't work, and I learned from that, and this is what I do. There's things even in the interview process that you can do that. Certainly leveraging 360 tools, but then also leveraging like Entromy as well. I think when we've looked at our data of organizations that have used Entromy to measure org health, that relationship between senior leader effectiveness and eNPS is very strong. So how the organization perceives senior leaders is one of the biggest drivers of organizational health. And in fact, when we look at organizations that have strong senior leadership versus not strong senior leadership, it's like a 70-point eNPS difference. It's from like -20 to 50 basically. And so if you're able to, for one, have regular check-ins with those leaders, whether in a PE example, if they're deal leads, board is checking in with them to understand what's going on and making sure they're reading the situation correctly. But then also tools like, Entromy is, doing pulse surveys, things like that, to see how people are perceiving the senior leader's impact. That will definitely go a long way.
Evan, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really looking forward to hearing your talk at SIOP, and just really appreciate your time overall and sharing some of this knowledge about leadership agility.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks.
Thanks.